What happens when someone's arrogance pushes them to a point where they think they can get away with anything? When Karen, the neighborhood HOA president, decided that my daughter's school ramp wasn't up to her so-called standards, she took matters into her own hands in the most dangerous way possible. She set it on fire. But here's the twist. She didn't know who I really was. She had no idea that the very person she was messing with was the one person who could stop her, and the one person who was sworn to protect the community from exactly this kind of recklessness. Imagine this. I'm standing right there, watching everything unfold, the fire growing bigger by the second. And Karen? She's still blissfully ignorant, thinking she's above the law. But in that moment, I knew it. It was time for a reality check. What she didn't know was that I wasn't just another parent. I wasn't just another neighbor. I'm the fire marshal, and this fire wasn't going to be the only thing she'd be dealing with. Now, Karen would have to face the consequences of her actions, and it was about to get real. Karen had always been the type of person who thought her opinion was law, the kind of person who, if she didn't get her way, would make sure everyone knew it. As the president of the Homeowners Association, she had grown accustomed to the power she wielded in our small suburban neighborhood. It wasn't just about the bylaws for her. It was about control. And if anyone dared to challenge that control, they quickly learned that Karen wasn't afraid to push the limits to get what she wanted. I had seen her flex her authority before, but I never imagined the lengths she would go to when she thought she could dictate everything around her, even if it meant causing harm. It all started innocently enough. My daughter's school, a small institution in the heart of our neighborhood, had always been a safe haven for children. It wasn't fancy, but it had what mattered: caring teachers, a nurturing environment, and most importantly, a ramp that made the school accessible to all children, including those with disabilities like my daughter. The ramp was more than just an architectural feature. It was an essential lifeline for my daughter. She had been born with a physical disability, and while she was mobile, the ramp allowed her the freedom to move around without relying on others. It was her sense of independence. So when Karen, who was never known to mind her own business, decided that the ramp was too old and needed to be upgraded, we didn't think much of it at first. She had a reputation for meddling in things that didn't concern her, and this time, it seemed like just another one of her attempts to improve something that didn't need changing. But when Karen started pushing the school's administration to do something about the ramp, the situation escalated quickly. I remember the meeting vividly. I was there, sitting in the back, listening as she voiced her complaints. "It's an eyesore," she declared, looking down at her clipboard with a smug expression. "It's outdated, and honestly, it doesn't meet modern safety standards." The principal tried to calm her, assuring her that the ramp was still functional and met all required safety codes. But Karen wouldn't hear it. She was relentless, pressing the issue with a fury that seemed disproportionate to the problem at hand. At first, I thought Karen's complaints were just another one of her attention-seeking tantrums, but I was wrong. She wasn't just seeking attention, she was making things happen. Without consulting anyone, without involving the school board or parents like myself, Karen had taken matters into her own hands. She had started making plans with a contractor, and before I knew it, they were setting up to demolish the ramp entirely. It was as if the school, its staff, and the parents had no say in the matter. Karen was determined to fix something. That wasn't broken, and she wouldn't stop until she got her way, and then came the day that changed everything. I had just dropped my daughter off at school and was heading to work when I received a call. It was the school's principal, his voice panicked and shaken. "There's been an incident," he said, struggling to get the words out. "The ramp, it's on fire." My heart sank, and for a moment I couldn't process what he was saying. "What do you mean, on fire?" I asked, my voice shaking. "How? Why?" The principal couldn't answer me, but he said one thing that made my blood run cold. "Karen's been here. She's behind it." I rushed back to the school, my heart racing, praying it was some sort of misunderstanding. But as I arrived, The sight before me confirmed my worst fears. Thick, black smoke was billowing from where the ramp used to stand, and the air was heavy with the acrid scent of burning wood and rubber. There were fire trucks, sirens blaring, and the frantic activity of firefighters trying to get the blaze under control. My daughter's school, a place where she had felt safe, was now threatened by the very thing that had once promised her freedom. I pushed through the crowd of onlookers, desperate to find out what had happened. I couldn't focus. My mind kept racing, but all I could hear were snippets of the conversation around me. She did it on purpose. They say she's the one who started the fire. I couldn't believe it. Karen had always been unpredictable, but this was something else. This was reckless, malicious. I couldn't fathom why anyone, especially someone in her position of power, would deliberately destroy something so vital to the community. As I looked at the scene, my thoughts were interrupted by a voice behind me. It was one of the firefighters. "Are you involved with the school?" he asked. I nodded, my stomach still in knots. "I'm the fire marshal," I said, holding up my badge. His eyes widened and he stepped back, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. But what struck me was the realization that Karen, the woman responsible for the fire, had no idea who I was. She had no idea that I was the very person who could stop this situation from getting worse, and that's when it hit me. The scales had tipped. This wasn't just an accident. It was a personal attack on my daughter, her education, and our community. And Karen didn't even know that I was the one who could hold her accountable for it. In that moment, everything changed. The fire, the destruction, the chaos. It was no longer just an isolated incident. It was something far greater, something that would have consequences beyond what Karen could imagine. She had underestimated me, but she wouldn't get away with it. The fight for justice had just begun. The tension between Karen and the school had been building for months before the fateful day she set the ramp on fire. It wasn't just about the ramp itself. It was about control. Karen had always believed that she had the right to dictate every little aspect of our neighborhood. From petty things like the color of house paint to more serious matters like school, policies, she had an opinion on everything. But this time, she had crossed a line that no one could ignore, and the consequences would be far worse than any of us had imagined. The ramp, located at the entrance of the school, was something that held deep personal significance to me and my daughter. For years, it had allowed her to move freely in and out of the building, a vital piece of infrastructure that made the school accessible for children with disabilities. My daughter, Emma, had been born with a physical disability, and while she was able to walk with some assistance, the ramp had allowed her to be independent in a way that no one had expected. It wasn't just a ramp to me. It was a symbol of her autonomy and the freedom she had fought so hard to claim. When Karen first brought up her complaints about the ramp, I didn't think much of it. After all, she had a history of voicing her opinions about things that didn't concern her. The ramp, in her eyes, was an eyesore. "It doesn't fit the aesthetics of the school," she had told the principal in one of the meetings. "It's outdated and potentially unsafe." She made it sound like it was an emergency, a matter of life or death, even though the ramp had passed every safety inspection and was designed specifically to accommodate children with mobility challenges. But that was Karen for you. Always. Looking for something to complain about. The more Karen pushed, the more I started to feel uneasy. The principal assured me that the ramp was safe and that no changes would be made without consulting the parents. But Karen didn't care about the process or the opinions of others. She had already made up her mind. She didn't like the ramp, and she was determined to do something about it. One afternoon, as I was sitting in my office, I received a phone call from the school. My heart immediately dropped when I saw the caller ID. It was the principal. He sounded frantic as he spoke. "We have a situation," he said, his voice shaky. "Karen, she's here, and she's done something. There's a fire." A fire. The words. echoed in my mind, but I couldn't make sense of them. "What do you mean there's a fire?" I asked, already feeling the panic rising in my chest. "Where? What happened?" "We're not sure yet," he said, "but she was the last one here. We believe she might have started it." I couldn't believe it. Karen, the self-appointed enforcer of neighborhood rules, had taken things into her own hands in the most dangerous way imaginable. How could she do this? How could anyone think it was okay to set fire to a school ramp, especially when it was a necessary lifeline for children like Emma? My mind raced as I tried to understand the extent of what had happened. What kind of person would do something like this? I rushed to the school, praying that the fire wasn't as bad as it sounded. But when I arrived, I was met with a sight that I'll never forget. The air was thick with smoke, and the ramp that had once been so important to Emma was now engulfed in flames. Firefighters were scrambling to contain the fire, and a crowd of onlookers had gathered outside, whispering and pointing. I could barely comprehend what I was seeing. The very thing that had allowed Emma to feel like she was a part of the school was now being destroyed. And all because Karen had decided that it didn't meet her standards. The anger I felt in that moment was overwhelming, but it was overshadowed by the feeling of helplessness that crept in. The fire was still burning, the smoke still thick in the air, and I couldn't do anything about it. I stood there, feeling like I had been robbed of something precious. My daughter's sense of security, her independence, it was all slipping away because one person had decided to act on her own misguided beliefs. As I watched the fire burn, I couldn't help but think about all the things that had led to this point. Karen had always been entitled, always used her position to force others to follow her rules. She had spent months pushing her agenda, and no one had taken her seriously enough to stop her. The school had tried to appease her, tried to explain that the ramp was safe, that it was necessary. But Karen didn't care. She never cared about anyone else's needs, and now she had made that abundantly clear. What made it even worse was that Karen didn't even seem to understand the gravity of her actions. She was standing there, watching the fire, completely unaware that I had arrived. She didn't know that I was the one who could stop this from getting worse. She didn't know that I was the fire marshal. But that moment, the moment I realized that Karen was oblivious to the fact that I was the one who could hold her accountable for what she had done, was when everything changed. I was no longer just a parent watching a ramp burn. I was no longer just a person affected by her recklessness. I was someone who had the power to stop it. The reality of the situation began to settle in, and I felt a surge of both anger and responsibility. Karen had no idea what she had just unleashed, but I knew exactly what I needed to do. At that moment, it was clear that the conflict wasn't just about a ramp anymore. It wasn't just about a petty dispute between a neighbor and the school. This was about something much bigger. This was about protecting my daughter, ensuring her safety, and holding Karen accountable for her actions. What Karen didn't realize was that she had crossed a line that could not be ignored. And she was going to have to face the consequences of her actions, no matter how high and mighty she thought she was. As I walked toward the scene, my heart pounded in my chest. I wasn't sure what Karen would do when she realized who I was, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. My daughter deserved better, and I would do whatever it took to make sure she got the justice she deserved. Karen had started a fire, but now it was time for her to face the heat. As I approached the school, a sense of dread gnawed at me. The smoke was thick and suffocating, pouring from the ramp like a black choking cloud that seemed to darken the entire schoolyard. Sirens blared in the distance as fire trucks pulled up, and the chaos was palpable. I could see the frantic movements of the firefighters, but I couldn't focus on them. My eyes were glued to the flames. The ramp, the very thing that had allowed my daughter and so many other children to navigate the school safely, was burning. The sound of the crackling flames filled the air, louder than anything else. I could hear the hissing of the water as the firefighters tried to control the blaze, but the fire was stubborn and it wasn't backing down. The ramp was old, yes, but it was sturdy. It should have never been set on fire. It should have never been in danger of being destroyed in this way, all because one woman had decided she didn't like the way it looked. I could feel my heart racing, but I did my best to keep my breathing steady. As a fire marshal, I had been trained to handle situations like this. I had seen fires, explosions, even car crashes, but this was personal. It wasn't just a ramp. It was a symbol of everything I'd worked to protect for my daughter. And now, it was being destroyed right before my eyes. As I pushed my way through the crowd of onlookers, I scanned the scene, looking for any sign of Karen. I didn't know where she was, but I knew she had to be nearby. This was her doing. She was the one who had set this in motion, and now she had to be held accountable. But the longer I stood there, watching the firefighters try to contain the blaze, the more I realized something else. Karen had no idea what she had done. And, worse, she had no idea that I was the one who could stop this. When I spotted her, my stomach turned. There she was, standing just a few yards away, completely unaware of the chaos she had caused. She was watching the flames, her arms crossed over her chest, a smug expression on her face. She looked almost proud, as if she had done something good, something noble. She didn't look concerned in the slightest. She wasn't panicking like the rest of us. She was calm, cool, and collected. But she didn't know the truth. She didn't know that I, of all people, was the one who could stop her, and I was standing right there, watching her from behind. I wanted to scream, to rush over and confront her, but I knew I couldn't. I had to stay calm. I had to be the professional. If I lost my cool, if I let my anger take over, I wouldn't be able to do what needed to be done. The fire was still burning, and the situation was far from under control. The firefighters needed my expertise, and I couldn't let anything get in the way of that. But inside, I was boiling with rage. How dare she think she could just destroy something that had meant so much to my daughter and so many other children? How dare she think that her opinion was more important than the safety and well-being of others? I moved toward the fire, stepping past the firefighters who were already working to put out the flames. I could feel the heat of the fire on my skin, the intense heat that made it hard to breathe. It was a battle. Firefighting was always a battle. But this was more than just fighting a physical fire. This was a fight for my daughter's safety, for her rights, for her future. I could feel the weight of the responsibility bearing down on me as I worked to control my emotions and focus on the task at hand. The fire was spreading faster than I had expected. It was climbing up the side of the school building now, and I could see the panic in the eyes of the staff and students who had gathered outside, watching the flames eat away at the ramp. It was as though they all knew the stakes, but were helpless to stop it. The firefighters were doing everything they could, but this fire was stubborn. It didn't care about our plans, our efforts. It was relentless. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a voice behind me. It was Karen. "You know, this whole place could use a little improvement," she said, her voice dripping with arrogance. "Maybe if the ramp had been built better in the first place, this wouldn't have happened." I froze for a second, stunned by her audacity. She was standing there, casual as ever, as if the fire she had started wasn't destroying everything we had worked so hard for. She was completely oblivious to the gravity of the situation, to the damage she had caused. But I couldn't let her know how close she had come to destroying everything. Not yet. She had no idea who I was, and that was the advantage I needed. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "You should be more careful with your actions, Karen," I said, my voice calm but firm. "This isn't something to be taken lightly." Her eyes flickered with confusion, but she quickly masked it with a smirk. "Oh, don't worry, I'm sure it'll be fine. The fire department's here, after all. I could feel my blood boil. She was so nonchalant, so dismissive of the devastation she had caused. She didn't understand that this wasn't just another one of her petty neighborhood squabbles. This was real. This was affecting children, my daughter included. And it was my job to protect them, to protect her. I stepped forward, my badge now clearly visible. "Actually," I said, the weight of the words sinking in, "I'm the fire marshal, Karen." Her expression changed in an instant. The smirk vanished, replaced by an expression of realization. She had no idea what she had just done, and I could see the panic start to creep into her eyes. She didn't know that the one person she had pushed so far was the very person who could make sure she faced the consequences. She didn't know that I had the power to ensure she would never do something like this again. As she stammered, trying to find the right words, I could see the fear in her eyes. She was finally realizing just how much trouble she was in. But I couldn't let her off the hook just yet. Not after what she had done. I turned my attention back to the fire, focusing on getting it under control. I wasn't going to let my personal feelings get in the way of doing my job. I had to stay focused. But as I glanced at Karen one last time, I knew that the real battle wasn't over yet. The fire would be put out, but the fight for justice was just beginning. The heat from the fire seemed to intensify as I stepped closer to Karen. The flames had been tamed somewhat, but the damage was already done. I could feel the adrenaline surging through me, and though I'd handled plenty of fires before, this one was different. This one was personal. My daughter's school, a place meant to nurture, was now a disaster zone, all because of Karen's unchecked sense of entitlement. As I watched her stand there, still oblivious to the consequences of her actions, I knew the time had come for her to realize just how much trouble she was in. Karen stood, arms folded, watching the firefighters scramble to control the flames, her expression smug as ever. She had no idea who I was. She had no clue that I was the one person who could change everything for her in an instant. The audacity of her attitude, the way she acted as if this was just another neighborhood squabble, was infuriating. My fingers clenched into fists, but I forced myself to remain calm. I had to stay professional. I walked toward her, my heart pounding in my chest. Each step I took felt like an eternity, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. I stopped, just a few feet away, close enough for her to hear every word I said. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something other than her usual arrogance. A flicker of uncertainty. "Do you know who I am?" I asked, my voice steady but filled with unspoken authority. She looked at me for a moment, clearly taken aback. I could see the confusion in her eyes as she tried to place me. Then, without warning, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my badge, holding it up for her to see. The firelight reflected off the badge, the engraved letters glowing in the dimming light. Her face turned pale, and the confident smirk she had been wearing evaporated in an instant. I could see the realization hitting her. She understood now. I wasn't just another parent, another bystander who had been affected by her carelessness. I was the one person who could hold her accountable for what she had done. "I'm the one who saves lives, Karen," I said, my voice cutting through the silence between us. "And I'm the one who will be reporting you for this." The words hung in the air, thick with gravity. Her mouth opened and closed as if she was searching for something to say, but no words came. She was caught, trapped by her own arrogance, unable to hide behind her sense of superiority anymore. The truth was undeniable. She had gone too far, and she would face the consequences. Karen stood frozen for a moment, her face a mixture of shock and fear. The realization of what she had done and who I was finally hit her. But this wasn't just about the fire or the ramp anymore. This was about something far more significant. It was about the responsibility that came with her actions. She had set something on fire, But I was the one who had the power to make sure she would never be allowed to do this again. As I turned and walked away, I could feel her eyes on me. But I didn't look back. The moment was hers to process. My focus remained on the fire, the damage that had been done, and the steps I would take to make sure the truth was revealed. Karen had made a mistake, and now it was time for her to face the consequences. As the fire continued to rage, the firefighters worked tirelessly to contain the remaining embers, their efforts aided by my knowledge of fire safety. It was clear that this fire hadn't started naturally. It had been deliberately set, and the more I thought about it, the more furious I became. Karen had taken it upon herself to destroy something that was essential, not just to my daughter's independence, but to every child who relied on that ramp. My daughter's safety, her ability to access her school, and the very spirit of the community had been threatened, all because Karen believed she could impose her will without consequence. As the firefighters finally began to get the blaze under control, I approached the scene with a calm sense of authority. But inside, I was seething. The damage was done, and there was no undoing it. The ramp was gone. The school was temporarily unsafe for children who needed it. But I was not about to let Karen walk away unscathed, not after all the harm she had caused. It wasn't just about the ramp. It was about the principle of it all. Karen had abused her position in the HOA, using it to enforce her personal beliefs without any regard for the consequences. She had taken the law into her own hands, acting out of pure arrogance and ignorance. She hadn't just damaged property, she had violated the trust of the entire community. People relied on the safety of their children and the infrastructure that supported their education, and now she had compromised that trust. But what Karen hadn't anticipated was that I wasn't just a concerned parent standing by, helpless. I was the fire marshal, and it was my job to make sure that people like her, people who thought they could get away with reckless actions, faced the consequences of their actions. With the fire nearly extinguished, I turned my attention to Karen. She stood there, her face pale and nervous as she watched the firefighters mop up the last of the flames. She was now fully aware of who I was, but there was no remorse in her eyes, just fear. She knew she had crossed a line, and now she would have to answer for it. I approached her slowly, making sure she understood that this was not the moment to avoid responsibility. "Karen," I said, my voice firm but controlled, "you've put more than just the school in danger today. You've jeopardized the safety of every child who relies on that ramp, and now you'll face the consequences of your actions." Her lips trembled as she stammered, trying to find some excuse or justification. I didn't mean for this to happen," she muttered, her eyes darting to the ground. But I wasn't having any of it. She could no longer hide behind excuses, or her usual manipulative tactics. I had seen enough. "It doesn't matter if you meant for it to happen or not," I responded sharply. "The fact is you did, and now you will be held accountable. This isn't just about a ramp, it's about people's lives, the safety of children, and the trust we place in each other to do the right thing." I could see the shock on her face as the reality of the situation hit her. There was no way to worm her way out of this one. She had set a fire, and no amount of backpedaling would erase the fact that she had caused real harm. I walked over to the principal, who had been standing off to the side, watching the confrontation unfold. "We need to make sure we document everything," I said, my voice steady. "This needs to go through the proper channels. Karen's actions have consequences, and she needs to be held responsible." The principal nodded, visibly relieved to have someone with the authority to take charge of the situation. I knew this would be a long process, but I was ready for it. Karen might have thought she could get away with destroying something as important as the school's ramp, but I wasn't going to let her. I was determined to see this through, no matter how long it took. The following days were filled with meetings, investigations, and legal procedures. Karen was, as expected, combative at every turn. She tried to deny her involvement at first, claiming that the fire was accidental. But I had the evidence, the security footage, the witness statements, and, of course, the fire itself, which could be traced back to her actions. She had made a critical mistake in thinking that she could escape the consequences of her recklessness. The legal repercussions were swift. The school board launched an official investigation, and Karen's position within the HOA was quickly questioned. She was suspended from her role as president, and a formal complaint was filed against her for negligence and endangerment. The public backlash was swift, as the community rallied behind the school and the children who had been affected by the fire. Karen's once untouchable status was shattered, and she was left to deal with the fallout of her own arrogance. But the emotional payoff for me came when I looked at my daughter, Emma. In the aftermath of the fire, the school rallied to rebuild the ramp. The community came together to support the school, and my daughter's safety was never in doubt. I had fought for her right to feel safe, and I had won. The ramp was rebuilt, stronger and safer than ever before. And Emma, despite the chaos, was able to walk again, to feel the independence she had once lost, all thanks to the strength of a community that wouldn't let one person's recklessness define their lives. As for Karen, the public shame and legal consequences were only the beginning. She had thought she could impose her will on others without consequences, but in the end, she had lost everything. She lost her position, her reputation, and her community's trust. And though I had done my duty as the fire marshal, the true victory wasn't in her punishment. It was in the security and safety restored to my daughter's school and the peace of mind I could now give to Emma. I had fought for her, and I had protected her. That was the resolution I had fought for, and it was the one I would carry with me for the rest of my life. Karen thought she could control everything, impose her will, and get away with it. She underestimated the strength of the community, the strength of a parent willing to fight for their child. She thought she could destroy the very thing that had given my daughter her independence without facing any consequences. But she was wrong. What she didn't realize was that her reckless actions had sparked a battle she could never win. It wasn't just about a ramp. It was about the principle of it all. It was about a mother and a community who would not stand idly by and let one person ruin everything that had been built. We fight not only for our own, but for the collective well-being of everyone, and Karen's actions, in the end, only exposed the truth, that when we're pushed to the edge, we find the strength to push back. I could have just let it go, accepted the damage, and moved on. But protecting my daughter, and others like her, was worth every ounce of energy I had. It wasn't just my family at stake. It was the safety and security of every child who used that ramp, every person who believed in the integrity of the school and the community. Karen's downfall wasn't just her losing her position or the community's trust. It was the realization that people who think they can control others without consequence are often the ones who find out they were wrong. So, I ask you, what would you have done if it were your family in danger? If you knew that someone's selfishness could harm those you love, how far would you go to protect them? Would you stand up, speak out, and make sure justice was served? Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. Share what you would have done if you were in my shoes. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more real stories like this, where strength, justice, and the power of standing up for what's right prevail.